Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the Pork Queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. I'm Justin Brady in the Brady Dental Care Studios, and today I'm joined by Jason Clayworth, reporter at Axios. Jason, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Justin.
Before we get started, everybody, this is your reminder to subscribe. It's on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeart. It's literally everywhere, so make sure to do that. Also, give it 5 stars, and don't forget, if you want, you can come to iowapodcast.com. We have everything posted there, including photos of me and my guests doing public prop. No, just kidding. We don't have any of that. So anyway, Jason, thanks so much for coming in here. I really appreciate it. It's perfect timing. We've been kind of thinking about getting together and talking about the future state of media. And of course, what better time than right now? Because BuzzFeed just totally closed down and Fox News kicked Tucker Carlson off, and then CNN kicked Don Lemon off. So even if you're left or right, everyone's happy.
It's been a rough few days for journalism.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start broadly. What is going on? I have more clear questions, but broadly, what is going on? What just happened? Because this is like pandemonium.
Well, I think that media corporations find that some of the statements that their top folks are making are causing them some grief. And Fox News particularly, we see huge settlement and probably more to come. And so it's costing corporations a big deal, and people are taking note of what's going on with some of these situations.
Yeah, I mean, is this the tipping point, or have we been leading up to this moment for a while, do you think?
I think that the Fox News settlement may be a tipping point and may see some changes, but I think it's important to put it in perspective. Some of these types of issues have been going on for years.
Yeah.
And so this is not necessarily anything new. I also view some of these folks a little bit differently than journalists that you might see at, reputable places like, newspapers. I kind of view some of these folks a little bit more as almost like entertainers almost.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I put them in a little bit different category than a straight journalist. So I don't know. I have a slightly different view, I suppose.
I'm hoping I'm hoping most people agree with that. I think it's pretty fair. They're definitely not straight down the middle. They're definitely not trying to give an objective take on news. Now some of the personalities, both on, I would say, Fox News and CNN, BuzzFeed, I mean, they're kind of clickbait city. That's kind of what they do. It's kind of more entertainment. But, there are definitely more independent voices on both those networks. And Tucker and Dawn, particularly, they were the extreme voices. They got reactions. That was kind of their job. So, do you think there's this pullback to the center? Because we have the extremes getting axed. Is there a major pullback to the center, do you think?
I would like to think so. But it's so hard to judge in this climate because what I think is happening, I'll turn around the next day and something else happens. And I'm talking about the world of politics as well as journalism. And so it's really hard to gauge that. I would like to think so. And I hope that this is a lesson to people that they should get their news from more than one source, that they should try to keep an open mind and see what other folks, other broadcasts, other publications are saying and reporting, because it adds a great deal of depth and perception to an issue.
So actually, that's interesting you bring that up. There was a really good example of this. I actually don't know this guy's politics, but there's a Twitter space that I've enjoyed a few times in the last week. A guy named, I think it's Mario Narfall. I don't know if you've seen his spaces, but he gets like 10,000 people. He's had like all the big, like huge guests on these Twitter spaces. And he was posting really interesting, like what you said, people should get probably, look at a couple different sources. He was posting these hilarious screen captures. In this particular case, he was talking about like Elon Musk and how people he's like a really polarizing figure. And some publications are like he's the devil, and other publications are like he's the returning savior. but he was posting these image captures on verification. And Meta did verification. And the CBS headline was, Meta launches paid verification service in U.S. Pretty vanilla, pretty. And then he posted another headline right next to it about Twitter's announcement, and it's Elon Musk's Twitter is a scammer's paradise. A scammer's paradise, just to get that out there. And then like there's the recent thing, like Elon, and again, this is Elon's the figure, he's the hot figure right now, so he's in the news, but there was like the SpaceX launch of the Starship thing, and I was watching this because it's cool. Rockets launching is cool. And they said if it gets off the launch pad, we're going to be pretty darn happy because we're expecting there's a huge chance this thing's just going to blow up. So it got off the launch pad, got in the atmosphere, blew up. And the headline was, Elon Musk's SpaceX Starship rocket explodes minutes after launching from Texas. And I'm just like, I see it all the time. Like, is that what you're talking about? Try to read both sides and then the truth probably somewhere in the middle?
Well, especially when you're watching network 24/7 news cycles. I think that that's a little bit different. But I do believe that even in our local sphere, we should be looking at other sources, and not because I think that some of them are terribly skewed or unprofessional, but different takes and different publications have different focuses, and it gives the reader a broader perspective.
Yeah, so you actually sent me some really cool stuff. Axios has had this, by the way. You've talked about some of this before. And I should note, you used to be with the Register, but 2 papers are closing each week in the USA. Newspaper employment throughout the country is down 70% since 2006. You sent me all this. And then I think the Axios covered the fact that the Register has lost 70% of its subscribers. But meanwhile, Axios, your company, just hit 1 million subscribers. Now, that's obviously nationally. But what is, you're growing like a rocket ship. I think most people would agree with that. The data is quite obvious. But papers across the country are dying very, very quickly. What's the difference?
Well, I mean, I don't take any satisfaction in seeing newspapers dwindle. I think that that's a travesty. But I think that the difference is that people are reading differently than they did 10, 15 years ago. People aren't picking up a newspaper and reading an article from start to finish. They're instead reading on their telephones, and it's a very quick read and people's attention span is now very narrowed, and they want to read, they want to get their news in just quick little bites. And so I think that our society has changed a great deal. And so that's driving, from my perspective, I believe that's driving a big piece of this. And the changes are ongoing. We're seeing newspapers, as you mentioned, close every week. For me, it's really sad to watch this unfold.
Yeah, I mean, do you agree that, and maybe you don't, but I kind of think that some journalism, not all, there are great, amazing journalists that are working very, very hard. I feel like they're working harder now because a lot of their colleagues aren't. But do you think maybe the quality of journalism has gone down, therefore people aren't reading the long articles? I think it's easy to just generally say people have changed, they don't read the article. But we as content creators, I used to be on WHO radio, I've written for the Register. Is it partly our fault?
But on the other hand, I still see great journalism today. And there are great journalists still out there, but there are far, far, far fewer of them, tens of thousands fewer, and that is a big difference. And so what we're seeing today is that there are lots of, I mean, if you want to zoom into local government sort of issues, there are a lot of activities, a lot of governments, a lot of different things that are going on that are never covered, and people don't know about them. And just because there are so far fewer journalists that are out there, and people are ignorant about their local civics because unless they go out and cover it themselves, there is no coverage.
I think a lot of people just assume that the news has all these tools, I'll call it the news, right? They have all these tools, they have all these little things set up, they know everything that's going on. But the fact of the matter is the news publications miss quite a bit, because if no one tells them, they can't report it, which sounds really simple. But I remember when I first got involved, then I was like, oh my gosh, people would ask me, why aren't you covering this? Like, dude, we have, I don't know. We have no idea. We didn't even know that was a thing.
Right. And, 10 or 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, WHO radio had reporters that
Yes.
were on the ground, and they would
they
go
did.
to these and they would ferret out stories. And you don't see nearly as much of that anymore. Instead, it's because, and this isn't any specific person's fault, but there are such far fewer reporters that it has largely turned into following a press release or somebody notifying them of something rather than a reporter actually digging and bringing stories to light on their own. So that is a product of the current media scene.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And I think what you're hitting on is something very significant because, just following the press release and scraping it and then reposting it, or some people tweet about something and I write an article about that tweet that I saw. And what reporters have done, some of them, is they have effectively put themselves in the camp of being replaced by AI, right? Because that's what AI can do. And so a lot of reporters or a lot of writers are like, oh my gosh, our jobs are going to get disrupted by AI. AI can do this task. And I'm like, no. AI can scrape stuff off Twitter and press releases like some people have been doing for years and just republishing that information. But AI can't, at least not yet,
right, knock on wood,
can't do reporting. So do we see people like yourself, this is what you do, actually doing reporting? Is that why? Is that one of the reasons Axios is actually growing like it is?
I believe so. Axios has its model is to focus largely on local markets, and so they've gone in. We're now in roughly 30 markets. We've been growing. Des Moines was one of the first 4, and I think that the winning formula for Axios has been that they hire reporters that have lived in their community for a long time. Most of the reporters that they hire have been reporters at other publications for a long time. They know their communities quite well. And so it's speaking to an audience from a personal voice. And I think that is a big difference. And I see a lot of reporters in other publications that come from other states. They do fine work, but there is a missing element there. And I think that is part of the magic sauce.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm glad you brought up how Axios grew, because you grew by focusing, like you said, on local communities. We just got done with COVID. I mean, some people don't think we're done with it, but I mean, I think the president, didn't he sign some "we're done now" kind of thing? So I think I'm safe saying that finally without getting like people mad at me. But COVID separated everybody. Like, we were in our houses, and even like as the vaccines came out, even as people got a little bit more comfortable, there was still that distance that people kept, social distance, but also psychological distance. And so, there is this longing for togetherness. There's this longing for unity. Are people pushing back on these national faceless brands that we don't have any connection with? And are they kind of circling the wagons or tightening their spheres of influence to people they know? Like, because I can go out in the Des Moines community, I can ask a bunch of people, and I'm sure at least primary sources or secondary sources, people are going to know who you are. They have talked to you, and they trust you to some level, probably way beyond like a national news source. So are we seeing, because I mean, NBC, I think it's NBC, yeah, in 2022, August, the New York Times reported NBC would be ending programming 10 p.m. Eastern, returning it to local outlets. Now, I don't think they've done this yet, to my knowledge, but are we seeing a national pullback and local entities growing fast to fill that void?
I hope so. I'd like to think so, but I'm unsure. I'm uncertain. I see that there is a great hunger for that type of local reporting and that intimacy that you see with Axios's local brand. I see that quite strongly here in Des Moines and in other cities that we're at. On the other hand, people have a tendency to, again, zoom in on who they agree with, and news stations that play to their political likes rather than their dislikes. It's like on Facebook, when you see somebody that says something you disagree with, you unfriend them. And this is,
right.
It's akin with the news media in some ways. There are people that if something was written that they disagree with, all of a sudden they discount the entire publication.
Right.
So I hope that we're seeing a trend back to folks being, more centered in their news selections. But, I think it's yet to be seen. I think we've got to watch and wait.
Yeah, I mean, so according to some of the articles you sent me, I think it was the ones we were reading together, some like even local or family outlets are snatching up some of these. I don't know if they're stations or local papers, and even nonprofits are getting it. Now, I don't know much about this. I don't know if you know about this, because it was an article you sent, but even nonprofits are trying to get involved to save local media outlets.
Absolutely. And we see some of that in the Des Moines area. We have the Iowa Capital Dispatch, for example, that it does lots of great work and provides a real service to the communities. There is a big interest in that. People generally understand that news is important in their lives in some way, and I think that is a reflection of what we're seeing with various nonprofit groups that have come up, and startups like Axios that are changing the landscape. Yeah.
So I did want to get into what are those frequent challenges? Because obviously Axios is a pretty small team. Obviously you cover Des Moines. I don't think you have an Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, right?
No, we
Des Moines
do
not,
for
now.
Right.
What are those frequent challenges that you are facing in order to get the news out to people? I think I can make plenty of assumptions, but I'd like to hear it from you, obviously.
Well, I think that this has been the case throughout my entire career when I was working in newspaper and at Axios as well. It's always a selection of what you want to cover. You only have so many resources. You could always appreciate and enjoy 100 reporters on your staff.
Right.
But it's always a selection. You have to zero in on your coverage. That's what we're really good at. That's what it takes. And so that's the biggest challenge, is simply focus, in my perspective. And that's... it's a daily push to stay on task and on focus of what is most important to your community.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think that's where the Register's struggling?
I think that could be, but I think that the Register is more struggling from just this mammoth sea change in how people are reading. I think that its corporate ownership is troublesome for a local publication. It's sort of the McDonald's of the industry, and one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's part of the problem, but I don't believe that it is all the corporation's fault. This is going on and everywhere basically many publications across the U.S. and we're seeing it everywhere. So I think that's a part of the problem, but not the absolute big problem.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a huge, because I do PR and communications. For those that don't know, the Iowa podcast is my fun thing. And it's been a lot of fun, but I do PR and comms for emerging tech companies. And one of the things I talk to them about a lot is, the story that you pitch has to be a great idea for the journalist. It has to be great for their readers. But sometimes I feel that there is a desire to get the easy score from a journalist standpoint. And I wrote for the Washington Post for a little while. I wrote for the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and there is a temptation sometimes to go after those really, really easy scores. And that article that you think is going to get outrage is going to get a lot of clicks, clickbaity headlines, and that worked for a short period. But do you think that's finally starting to backfire because people realize there's not much content there, or is something else happening?
Well,
I don't know the answer to that. Not a leading question.
Yeah, I don't really know for sure. It's hard to gauge for me. I do believe that readers when they are paying attention, they are far more informed than sometimes we believe, or at least they are able to look deeper into a story and they see that something is a very quick hit. And sometimes that might be okay, but when that's your entire diet, it becomes a problem. I think that you do see some reader fatigue. I see that, and I think that that's apparent that readers are cognizant of that.
So are there one of the things I know you get a lot, because I got it a lot, I'm assuming everyone gets it a lot, is being accused of bias, right? You didn't cover this fair. You didn't present the angle clearly. I think on one show on WHO radio, we have a text line, or had a text line, at least because I'm not there anymore. But I remember one show, within 5 minutes, I got one commenter on the text line that called me a Republican fascist Nazi. And 5 minutes later, someone else said, "Go back to CNN, you liberal hack." So I know you get a lot of complaints because that's just the nature of the business. Are there any like bias checks that you do? I know that you work with Lynn too. Are there any bias checks, or are there any ways to make sure that your own biases aren't getting into those pieces? Because I know that's one of the biggest concerns anybody has that consumes news.
I think that it's important for reporters to recognize that they have personal biases and to be transparent as they can about them. And so the checks that I look for as a journalist is it's just knowing how I feel about something. If I feel strongly about an issue, then I have to try to, in my own mind, justify how I'm reporting and understand why I'm reporting this and ask myself continually, is it fair? And I rely on my colleagues like Lynn Todd to read and to give me feedback on that. I think that's important. I do think that there needs to be a great deal of transparency of who reporters are. I think that's part of what is enticing about Axios and why readers are gravitating towards that. We do talk about ourselves somewhat. I mean, we'll include ourselves in some way, like in the little outros of our newsletter or in the intros. Sometimes we'll say what we're doing this weekend, or, whatever it might be. And so we try to relate and be real people on that. We're not robots, and we're not the AI reporters yet. It's impossible to be completely neutral, and just recognize it and it doesn't mean we can't be fair.
And I've really truthfully noticed, not yourself, but just other reporters in general, I've sent them emails at times and said, and if you do this respectfully, the replies are pretty much always incredible. I think there was I don't think they've ever gotten a negative reply ever. But occasionally I'll say, hey, there was a other side of this story I don't think you saw. Love your work, but I just figured I'd point this out. I would say 10 times out of 10 at this point, if you do that kindly, I guess I wouldn't know because I never do it like a jerk, but I'm assuming if you do it like a jerk, you get a different response. But I usually hear pretty good feedback, like, I didn't consider that. That's a great angle. That's worth looking into. And so you and Lynn, at least in my experience, are pretty responsive. And it seems like you're pretty open for criticism. And would that be a fair assessment?
I absolutely believe so. I hope so. We always try to respond regardless of if people are, unless it's really profane, then that's a little bit different. I mean, there's certain times when, certain responses or certain emails or calls don't deserve response. But
no kidding. 100%.
99.9% of the time we do respond. And I appreciate even when a reader thinks that there is a great deal of bias or ignorance on my part as a reporter, which that happens occasionally, I appreciate it, because then I have another avenue to look at a story, or another way to look at a story, and it sometimes turns into some of our better pieces. And so we go back and we'll look at an issue again, or for future coverage, if there's something that we're overlooking. Again, we're human, and there's only so many hours in the day that we're working, and sometimes we overlook an important piece of a story, and that happens, and that's why we have another issue tomorrow.
Yeah, so I want to get back to something I said earlier. Maybe there are two layers here, but like AI writing for people, but then also news deserts. Is there maybe AI in journalism? Is this maybe a good thing because AI can scrape and find relevant articles and publish those in the news deserts, allowing people like yourself, allowing people like Lynn, all our friends at the Register. I know Courtney's going to be in here next week, allowing them to actually do the reporting in that digging, because AI is scraping and putting up the easy stuff. And consumers do want some of that. Just because it's scrapable off a press release or on Twitter doesn't mean it's useless, and doesn't mean consumers don't want it. So there is a need for that. So is that possibly a tool that people like yourself will be using in the future?
I absolutely believe and hope that it is a tool that we'll be using. I have great dreams of seeing AI potentially scrape a city council meeting or a supervisor's meeting, and making note of the things that are important, because they're very dry. I mean, just by their nature, they're very dry documents, but there's a lot of really, really rich and important information within them, and it takes a lot of time.
That's so true.
So, I mean, I could see ways that AI could really help us zero in on what's most important.
Right. Yeah, because you have to sit. That's so true. And like it's an audio video platform. So it's not like, people forget the journalists are the ones that write you the summaries, because they sit through the slog of data. They do the FOI requests. And that's a lot of time is not actually writing anything, but just sitting through all the mountains of data and filtering through it. And AI will make that stuff a lot faster and a lot easier. That's actually a really interesting point. Have you used any of these tools yet? Any AI tools? I'm curious.
I've tried the little GPT, the chat
GPT.
things, but no, not yet.
Yeah.
Axios is actually looking at this and how we might use this in the future and how it might make us better. So we actually have a team that is looking deeply at. Yeah, we actually do, and so it's something that we're looking at. But it's also something that you have to be very careful with.
Yep,
there could be some great pitfalls, but also this is technology that potentially could, be a really great bit to help us as a society and as journalists.
I mean, I've been using Bing Chat a lot lately, and I've basically at this point stopped using Google. I don't even use Google and no search engines. Oh. Still use them kind of, but I basically use Bing Chat. Now that being said, I don't take Bing Chat's word because it sources everything. So then I usually chase down those sources, but I use that as my starting point to get somewhere. And some of the stuff it finds is how precise it can be is absolutely incredible. So I'm really curious to see. You can tell me if new features come online. Let me know. I definitely want to know.
When I started reporting, the internet was still relatively new, and so I know that this really ages me. But
yes.
But at the time, we didn't have access a lot. I mean, this was an age where it was coming to age. But think of how that has transformed us as well.
Yeah.
It's information that's instantaneous and that's at our hands. It's context that we're able to gather that would have taken a very long time in decades past.
And I believe we have that article right here from the Register saying the internet will never catch on. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Right.
There's no. I don't. If there is an article, you buried it really well.
Well, that one deserves to be buried because that would have been a major wrong. But I think that AI. I think that what we're seeing is another totally transition.
Agree. Yeah, I totally agree. If people do have a really great story, obviously metro or surrounding cities, how do they get it to you? Like, what's the best way to get it to you? The reason I asked that is because when I was at WHO, and even right now on the Iowa podcast, some of the pitches I see are all over the place. And so I usually respond back with, hey, if you really want to get an idea to a journalist, because this is what I do for a living for my clients. I was like, here are a couple steps to do it. So if there's a great story, someone needs to get it to you. What's your recommendation for them to pitch you on that story?
Talk with me, contact me, email jason@axios.com. It's really easy. And Lynn, L-I-N-H, at Axios.com. It's the best way. Just get in touch, talk with us in some way. We're quite accessible and it works. Just talk with us.
Now, do they need to format it in any special way?
No, it's as simple. We get as simple as one sentence pieces. Sometimes people don't want their name used.
Right.
But it gives us information about where to look and a story that might be important to obviously the person that sent it, but to others.
Now, if they reach out and said, I don't want to be named, I have some information, it gives you a starting point, but please don't name me. Mm-hmm. If they tell you that, you're not going to name them, right?
No, we don't. We don't do that. But we verify stories and we have other facts. But just people being in communication with us and letting us know helps us a great deal because otherwise, sometimes as we earlier in our conversation, you don't know something unless somebody talks with you. Same with if you see things that you think are unfair or a mistake, let us know because otherwise, you don't know.
I find that 9 times out of 10, if someone complained about coverage or they're dissatisfied at something being unfair in the news, it's probably because they didn't reach out. It's so simple. And if you reach out in kindness and you let people like yourself, like Jason, know, you guys are very receptive to stories. And of course, I need to thank you because you ran the story of the Iowa podcast launching, which is very appreciated. So,
well, I didn't do it as a favor to you, although I'm glad that it worked well for 100%. You. But I think that that podcasts like these are a way that informs the community. I think it's it's important for people, and I hope that the community embraces all forms of communication and media, newspapers, whatever it is. We're certainly not anti-newspaper. We want everyone at the scene because we need them very much in our community.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of gave a little bit of space because I didn't want it to look like a trade because when I reached out and I said, hey, Jason, I think this would be a cool story. Of course, I have my little pitch format that I sent over to you, but I wanted to put a little bit of spacing because I didn't want people to think there was a trade here because there absolutely was not.
No.
But I've been getting Axios for years, and you guys do an incredible job. How can people sign up for Axios if they're in if they're in the state, anywhere in the world, they can sign up for it. But
sure. Yeah.
Metro residents, how do they sign up for that?
It's simple as clicking on a link on our webpage and signing up. And so, we do, and a little asterisk there, we do take people off our list if you don't open it for a month.
Oh.
So they're active readers. And so we encourage people to stay engaged with us, continue to open those. And
do you warn people before you kick them off?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
We send an email.
That's cool.
I'm glad that you don't know that.
That's cool.
We send an email because we want active readers. We've got roughly 60,000 in Des Moines, which is I'm really proud of that.
That you should be.
And I think that speaks to the hunger of local news.
Well, not
and what
to
people
mention, because you advertisers, you have advertisers, you need and you can confidently tell them these are not 60,000 subscribers. These are people reading because we kick people off if they don't read. So that's really good for ad revenue as well. No, Jason, I really appreciate you coming in here. I appreciate the work you're doing. Axios.com is the website if you want to sign up. And it's Jason, if you have any ideas, everybody, Jason@Axios.com. Thank you so much for coming on the Iowa podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa podcast.